She was 85 years old, a grandmother from Germany. She had boarded AIDAmar in Hamburg for what was supposed to be a relaxing cruise through the waters of Spain and Portugal. On December 18, 2025, the ship docked in Vigo, Spain, and she joined approximately 50 other passengers on a bus tour to the nearby coastal town of Baiona. It was the kind of shore excursion that cruise passengers take every day. A scenic drive, a picturesque village, the chance to stretch their legs and take some photographs before returning to the ship. She never made it back. At around 2:30 in the afternoon, the woman wandered away from her group. She walked out onto the rocks at Concheira Beach, drawn by the dramatic sight of waves crashing against the shoreline. The Galician coast is famous for its rugged beauty, its rocky outcrops sculpted by centuries of Atlantic storms. The waves that day were particularly spectacular. Powerful swells rolling in from the open ocean, exploding against the stone in great plumes of white spray. She positioned herself on the rocks. She bent down, perhaps to get a better angle for a photograph, and then a wave struck. A neighbor who witnessed the scene from a distance saw her lose her balance. One moment she was there. The next moment she was gone, swept into the churning water by a force she never saw coming. The witness immediately alerted lifeguards. Within minutes, a massive rescue operation was underway. Maritime rescue boats, a helicopter, the Spanish Civil Guard, local police, an underwater rescue team, a boat from a nearby sailing club. Everyone converged on the location, searching the rough waters for any sign of the missing passenger. They found her body shortly afterward. Despite the speed of the response, she was already deceased. Spain's state meteorological agency had issued an orange weather warning for the region that day. Winds of 50 to 74 kilometers per hour, wave heights of 6 to 7 meters. These were not subtle warnings. They were alerts specifically designed to communicate danger. And yet an 85-year-old cruise passenger was standing on exposed rocks, photographing the very swells that would kill her. This is not an isolated incident. It is part of a pattern that has emerged with disturbing frequency in 2025. Cruise passengers venturing too close to the sea during dangerous conditions. Tourists underestimating the power of waves that can strike without warning. And the question that lingers after every tragedy: could this have been prevented? Just 6 weeks earlier, on November 8, 2025, a similar scene had unfolded on the island of Tenerife, in Spain's Canary Islands. A group of cruise passengers had gathered on a pier in Puerto de la Cruz to watch the rough seas. The region was under a red alert for coastal phenomena. Waves were reaching heights of 15 feet. These were conditions that local authorities specifically warned people to avoid. But the pier was accessible. There were no visible barriers, no cordons, no tape blocking access to the area where the tourists stood. And then a massive wave surged over the promenade. The footage, captured and shared on social media, is difficult to watch. One moment, a group of people are standing on the pier, looking out at the ocean. The next moment, they are tumbling through white water, swept off their feet by a force that came seemingly out of nowhere. Bodies colliding with concrete, people struggling in the churning foam, the chaos of an emergency unfolding in seconds. 10 people were affected by that single wave. Most were cruise passengers who had arrived that morning on ships docked in Santa Cruz de Tenerife. Among them was a 79-year-old Dutch woman who suffered cardiac arrest after being pulled from the water. Despite immediate emergency response, she could not be revived. She was pronounced dead before reaching the hospital. Sebastian Quintana, president of the coastal safety platform Canarias, 1500 km de costa, described the scene as one of the most harrowing he had ever witnessed. None of them were swimming, he said. They were simply observing the sea, simply observing, standing on a pier, watching waves, an activity that seems utterly benign, and yet it cost a woman her life. The tragedy on November 8th was not confined to Puerto de la Cruz. That same day, elsewhere on Tenerife, a 43-year-old Spanish man died in a similar incident. In La Guancha, less than 10 kilometers away, another man was swept into the water and later pronounced dead at the hospital. In Anaga, Additional tourists were injured by waves. 6 French tourists who had reportedly ignored a warning beacon were swept away at Playa del Roque de las Bodegas, requiring emergency rescue. By the end of that single day, 3 people were dead and 15 injured across the Canary Islands. Quintana called it the most tragic day in recent memory. 1 month later, on December 8, 2025, the pattern repeated, this time at a natural seawater pool called Charco de Isla Cangrejo, located along the rocky western coastline of Tenerife near the famous Los Gigantes cliffs. The pool, bordered by volcanic rock on one side and a cement barrier on the other, is popular with tourists who come to swim in its sheltered waters while enjoying views of the dramatic coastline. But on that day, the pool had been closed since December 3rd. Weather advisories warned of rough seas. Signs and fencing had been erected to prevent anyone from entering. Local residents knew the dangers. When waves are high, the cement barrier offers no protection. Swells can easily overwhelm it, sweeping anyone inside the pool out into the open ocean. According to local witnesses, a group of tourists ignored the barriers. They crossed police tape. They entered the closed area. They went into the pool despite every possible warning that the conditions were dangerous. And then, a powerful wave came. 4 tourists died, a 35-year-old man, a 55-year-old woman, another man whose age was not immediately confirmed, and a 4th victim, a woman who was initially resuscitated at the scene and airlifted to a hospital, but who died the following day. Rescuers recovered 3 bodies from the water that afternoon. The 4th victim fought for her life for hours before succumbing to her injuries. Local residents expressed frustration and sorrow. People don't know how the sea is here, one said. The danger of the pool, because there are rocks below on which people fall and can't get back up. It's very dangerous. The rocks below, the slippery surfaces, the powerful currents, the undertows that can pull even strong swimmers away from shore. These are hazards that exist at countless coastal locations around the world. Beautiful places that draw tourists precisely because of their dramatic interaction with the sea. And deadly places when conditions turn against those who venture too close. The cruise industry carries nearly 35 million passengers annually. Millions of those passengers visit coastal destinations where the sea meets the shore in spectacular fashion. The Canary Islands alone welcomed over 4 million cruise passengers in 2024. Every single one of those travelers faces the same fundamental risk. The ocean does not care about your vacation. In August 2025, months before the tragedies in Tenerife and Vigo, another cruise couple lost their lives in remarkably similar circumstances. They were Vietnamese tourists, believed to be in their 50s or 60s, sailing aboard what is thought to have been Celestial Journey on a 7-night Greek islands itinerary. On August 8th, the ship docked at the port of AIDAmar on the island of Milos in the Cyclades. Milos is famous for Sarakiniko Beach, one of the most photographed locations in Greece. White volcanic rock formations, sculpted by wind and waves into smooth, otherworldly shapes that resemble a lunar landscape. Turquoise waters, stunning views, the kind of place that appears on Instagram feeds and travel brochures, beckoning visitors with its extraordinary beauty. The couple made their way to Sarakiniko. The woman walked out onto the white rocks, positioning herself to take a photograph of the scenery, perhaps a selfie, perhaps a shot of the waves crashing below. The wind that day was severe, reaching 9 on the Beaufort scale, gusts of up to 80 kilometers per hour, strong enough to cancel ferry services, strong enough to strand travelers at ports across the region, strong enough to sweep a woman off her feet. She lost her balance. Perhaps the wind caught her. Perhaps she stepped too close to an edge made slippery by sea spray. Whatever the cause, she fell into the water. Her husband immediately jumped in after her, desperate to save the woman he loved. Neither of them survived. The local conditions made recovery challenging. Rough seas and high winds hampered rescue efforts. A private boat with a lifeguard aboard eventually recovered the woman's body. A private diver located and retrieved her husband. Both were transported to the island's health center, where they were officially pronounced dead. Sarakiniko Beach, one of the most beautiful places in the Aegean. And now, for one family, a place of unimaginable grief. These incidents share common elements that reveal uncomfortable truths about shore excursion safety. First, the victims were often unaware of the true danger they faced. Standing on a pier to watch waves does not feel dangerous. Walking onto rocks to take a photograph does not seem life-threatening. The ocean can appear beautiful, even hypnotic, in its power. The distance between admiration and catastrophe is measured in seconds. Second, weather warnings were frequently in effect but inadequately communicated or enforced. In Tenerife on November 8th, a red coastal alert was active, yet the pier where passengers gathered was accessible and unguarded. In Vigo, an orange warning was issued, yet the bus tour proceeded to a coastal location where an 85-year-old woman could wander onto exposed rocks. In Milos, ferry services were canceled due to high winds, yet cruise passengers were still exploring beaches known for their exposed conditions. Third, the responsibility for safety is fragmented and unclear. Cruise lines book excursions but often use third-party operators. Tour companies take passengers to scenic locations but may not adequately warn them about dangers. Local authorities issue weather alerts but may not have the resources to barrier every dangerous spot. And passengers themselves make decisions, sometimes poor ones, about where to stand and what risks to take. The question of who bears responsibility becomes crucial when tragedy strikes. In August 2024, a cruise family sued Norwegian Cruise Line more than a year after a drowning incident in Bermuda. They alleged that the cruise line failed to properly notify guests about hazardous currents in the region. The lawsuit raised fundamental questions about what cruise lines owe their passengers in terms of safety information. Should cruise lines cancel shore excursions when weather warnings are in effect? Should tour operators be required to keep passengers away from coastal areas during high surf conditions? Should ports be obligated to close access to piers and promenades when waves pose a danger? These are not simple questions. Tourism is the economic lifeblood of many coastal communities. Canceling excursions costs money. Closing beaches and piers frustrates visitors who may have traveled thousands of miles for a vacation. The balance between safety and experience is constantly negotiated, and sometimes, tragically, the balance tips the wrong way. The Canary Islands, where so many of these incidents have occurred, face a particular challenge. The islands are known for mar de fondo, long-period swells generated far offshore that can arrive with little warning. Unlike local storm waves that build gradually as weather deteriorates, these swells can strike on otherwise calm days. A beautiful morning can become deadly in the time it takes a wave to travel from the open Atlantic to a crowded pier. Between January and October 2025, the coastal safety organization Canarias, 1,200 km de costa, recorded 54 drowning deaths across the archipelago. Many occurred when strong wave warnings had been issued. 65% of those who died had approached coastal areas despite active pre-alerts or warnings. These numbers tell a story of repeated tragedy, of warnings ignored, of dangers underestimated, of the gap between knowing something is dangerous and truly believing it could kill you. Cruise passengers may be particularly vulnerable. They arrive at destinations they have never visited before. They have limited time to explore before returning to the ship. They want to maximize their experience, see everything, photograph everything, make the most of their brief hours ashore. This urgency can lead to risk-taking behaviors that locals would avoid. A resident of Tenerife knows what a red coastal alert means. They have seen the power of winter swells. They understand that certain areas become death traps when conditions deteriorate. A tourist stepping off a cruise ship has none of this knowledge. They see a beautiful coastline and want to get closer to the waves. The tour guides, the excursion operators, the cruise lines themselves bear some responsibility for bridging this knowledge gap. When a shore excursion takes passengers to a coastal location during adverse weather, someone needs to ensure those passengers understand the risks. Someone needs to keep them away from dangerous areas. Someone needs to prioritize safety over photo opportunities. And yet, even with perfect information, accidents can happen. The sea is unpredictable. Rogue waves can appear without warning. A gust of wind at the wrong moment can change everything. No amount of caution can eliminate all risk when humans venture into environments where nature dominates. What happened to the 85-year-old German woman in Vigo was a tragedy. What happened to the Dutch woman in Tenerife was a tragedy. What happened to the Vietnamese couple in Milos was a tragedy. Each death represents a family shattered, a life cut short, a vacation that ended in the worst possible way. But these tragedies are also warnings. They tell us something about the relationship between cruise tourism and coastal safety. They reveal gaps in protection, communication, and enforcement that cost lives. And they raise questions that the cruise industry, local authorities, and passengers themselves need to answer. How close is too close? When should excursions be canceled? Who is responsible when a wave claims a tourist's life? The ocean does not provide answers. It simply continues as it always has, beautiful and indifferent. Waves rising and falling against shores around the world. Some of those waves bring joy to passengers watching from a safe distance. Others bring death to those who venture too near. The difference between watching and being swept away is often just a few feet, a few seconds, a single misjudgment about where the danger truly lies. Shore excursions are marketed as experiences, opportunities to explore destinations beyond the confines of the ship. They promise adventure, culture, natural beauty, memorable moments to bring home as photographs and stories. What they rarely mention is risk. The possibility that an afternoon sightseeing could become a fight for survival against forces no human can overcome. The woman who died in Vigo wanted a photograph. The tourists who died in Tenerife wanted to watch the waves. The couple who died in Milos wanted to capture the beauty of a Greek island. None of them expected to die. None of them understood that the sea they were admiring could reach out and take them in an instant. That is the cruel mathematics of coastal tragedy. Thousands of tourists stand on rocks and piers every day without incident. They take their photos and return to their ships and share their images on social media. The danger seems theoretical, something that happens to other people in other places, until it happens to you. AIDAmar continued its voyage after the incident in Vigo. The ship returned to Hamburg on December 22nd, as scheduled. The other passengers aboard had their vacation. The woman who died on the rocks of Baiona became a statistic, another entry in the grim ledger of cruise passengers lost to the sea. Her name has not been publicly released. Her story has been told in fragments, pieced together from local news reports and Coast Guard statements. She was 85. She was German. She was taking photographs. She was swept away. That is all we know about her final moments. All we will likely ever know. But her death, like the deaths in Tenerife and Milos, carries a message that every cruise passenger should hear. The sea is not a backdrop. It is not a prop for photographs. It is not a spectacle provided for your entertainment. It is the most powerful force on the surface of this planet, and it demands respect. The next time you stand on a rocky shore watching waves crash, the next time you walk out onto a pier to get a better view, the next time you position yourself for that perfect photo with the ocean in the background, remember the 85-year-old grandmother who did the same thing, and step back.